Hello, everyone. This is Adam Tabero, joined by my co-host, Jake Slomowitz. I'm very excited for this interview we have in store for you today. We have Florian Brand, co-founder and chief executive officer of ATAI Life Sciences. And we also have Dr. Srinivas Rao, co-founder and chief scientific officer of ATAI Life Sciences. Welcome, guys.
Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
And without further ado, we're going to jump right into the interview. So let's get to it. All right. So this question is for either of you. You guys can answer as you want. With your DMX-1002 program, I'm sure one of the primary early goals is to prove that the known cardiovascular risks associated with ibogaine can be properly mitigated in a controlled medical setting, and that benefits outweigh the risks. Are you aware of any examples of other drugs the FDA has approved with a similar cardiovascular risk profile to ibogaine?
Yeah, I'll let Srini kind of answer the second part. On the, I guess, DMX program more in general, we've picked this one and we're early on very excited about ibogaine because of the prior evidence in humans, very much in line with our other pipeline acids, where we also pick especially compounds that have shown, or compound classes that have shown prior evidence in humans. And that applies to signals of efficacy. It can be biomarkers, can be anecdotal evidence, even ideally it's even more, it's academic studies or previous studies. And in the case of ibogaine, indeed also on the safety side. So the safety profile is quite known, has been established in previous studies. So the goal is indeed to show a good risk-benefit profile in this very particular patient population of OUD patients. What was encouraging to see is, or also to hear, is that the advisors that we work with closely on this program, like Dr. Malik, anticipates that kind of the safety profile that we've seen previously in other studies and also here or the side effects are manageable or anticipated to be manageable in a controlled environment in a medical setting. And yes, Srini, why don't you take the second part of the question?
Yeah, absolutely. So, just kind of stepping back for a moment, why did we conduct this study? It was to really properly characterize the cardiovascular effects of this compound. So the literature that existed did not really do proper dose ranging. And of course, for the most part, academic literature. And there is a specific approach to testing QT and measuring QT that was not really followed in those previous studies. So this is a much more tightly controlled study. So we got the results, and again, it was broadly consistent, though there's always the devils in the details. The next question, of course, comes down, as you pointed out, Adam, to risk benefit. That's what this is all about in medicine broadly, right? So would this profile be acceptable for acne? No, not so much. But considering the safety and the morbidity and mortality associated with opioid use disorder, the view of the experts that we spoke to, assuming that we get the sort of efficacy that's been discussed with this compound, it would absolutely make that cut. And again, the interesting thing here is that it is very unique. So there's lots of compounds out there that have been approved that do indeed have that do have pronounced effects on QT interval. And some of those are antiarrhythmics. There's a bunch of antibiotics that do that. Even one of the SSRIs, citalopram, does this. One of the antiarrhythmics, thalidomide, actually has a number that is very comparable to this. In all of these cases, actually also some oncolytic compounds. So in all of these cases, they're initiated, typically in a doctor's office, and then then monitored pretty closely from there on out. Again, this is even more controlled. It's a single administration, completely monitored by the doctor. Lots of safety measures that are put in place, and some of these are, you prophylax the patient to prevent, downstream consequences, torsades de pointes. So you give them magnesium. This is a protocol that Deborah's put together that's been very effective for her in the own case series data that she's generated.
Awesome. I'd just like to ask you, Srini and Florian, you could definitely chime in too. How long is the oneric experience that you guys are, I guess, going for with the ibogaine trip for someone going into these trials?
Yeah, so it's It depends a lot on the dose. So in the wild, as it were, people have looked at very broad ranges of this compound, anywhere from like 7 mg per kg all the way up to about 25 milligrams per kilogram. And of course, the higher the dose, typically the longer the effect that you're seeing. So with this sort of dose range, kind of, let's just say approximately 10 mg per kg, the bulk of the anarephrenic effect seems to occur within the first 10 to 12 hours. It typically wraps up in that time. There are perceptual distortions that persist out to about 24 hours. There is some degree of ataxia, some of these cerebellar things, not being able to walk quite straight, that also lasts around 24 hours or so. So that's kind of the time frame. So this is different than everything else we're developing because there is an infrastructure for this, right? There are these in clinic essentially, or overnight, inpatient detox facilities, which are very well set up in many situations for the type of profile that we have here. That's obviously not true for depression. You can't have a psychedelic effect that lasts 12 hours that doesn't exist in the confines of a doctor's office, for example. No one, that just wouldn't work logistically.
Okay, and I know it's early days, but is it similar, I guess, in the sense with psilocybin? Is someone wearing like eye shades? Do they have music on and stuff like that when they're going through an ibogaine experience?
Typically, yes, that is in fact the case. It's not necessary. So what's been interesting about this compound is that, as long as if your eyes are open, you can sort of perceive almost normally in many situations, even with relatively high doses.
Wow.
If your eyes are closed, then you start seeing this sort of, the slideshow of your life.
Yeah.
Now, this isn't true for everybody. But generally speaking, this is what you hear this a lot. And when they're in the middle of that slideshow, they're really still. And there's not a lot of outside interaction, which I think is also, there's not a ton of interaction with psilocybin either, unless someone's beginning to get agitated or, getting agitated. This one seems to be even less so. These are all distinct from MDMA, for example, where there is much more interaction with the person in the room.
And isn't ibogaine unique for a psychedelic? Please correct me if I'm wrong, in that it modulates REM sleep in some capacity?
So I would say that yes, to some degree. I think the other way of looking at it is the effect that you're seeing looks a lot like REM sleep. So that's the other element. So if you look at what's being activated, broadly speaking, there is this element that it looks like REM sleep, which is sort of consistent, right? We're calling it a narephrenic, a dreamlike state that this is putting you into. But the unique bit is this slideshow.
Yeah, and for the viewers who may not know about ibogaine, and I've heard Deborah Mash speak about this, and it's really cool. And like you said, it's not the same for everyone, but there are a lot of stories where when people undergo an ibogaine journey, they see like a slideshow of, I guess, their life experiences, and they can almost, as like a viewer, they're looking at it from an objective viewpoint. That's what I've heard. And they can maybe see the origins of maybe some of their trauma that might have led to addiction and stuff like that. And no, it's just fascinating. I just wanted to put that out there. That's what I've heard for some of the viewers who may not be familiar with ibogaine.
Thanks, Jake. It appears the phase 1 study for DMX-1002 was completed in the UK. The earnings release states the company plans to engage regulatory authorities to assess progressing DMX-1002 into an efficacy study in patients with OUD. Do you plan to engage the MHRA in the UK, the FDA in the US, or potentially both? Is there any reason why you would choose to conduct the phase 2 trial in the UK as opposed to the US?
So at this point, we're evaluating still kind of where we're going to take this. We will provide more or an update when we have more information available to share. I think what I can say, and that's what we have also said in the past, given the significant unmet need in the States, the ultimate goal is of course to bring this therapy or this treatment to the US.
Yes, and speaking of significant unmet need, I know ATAI has said this in the past. What is it, like 75% of people will relapse within a year of trying to get off opioids. I guess it's just it's just addiction's really tough. Like I know it's early days, but would it be like a big win if you could just get that down to like 50%? Or I mean, like
yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit tough to speculate exactly where we want to target. I mean, so why is this different? What's the promise here? The drugs that are out there on the market are either sort of blunting cravings or making it difficult to get high, right? So buprenorphine and methadone blunt the cravings, and then the antagonists make it more difficult to get a high off of it. They're not really addressing the underlying issue. And you spoke about it nicely. The slideshow putatively allows a person to kind of address maybe some of the underlying issues that are driving the addiction in the first place. I want to emphasize that this is speculative.
yes,
right? Like every other psychedelic drug, we actually do not know the role that the psychedelic, or in this case, a neurophrenic effect has on ultimate efficacy. That just really has not been properly evaluated. It's just that there's a recurring theme when you talk to patients, at least those patients that are willing to talk, which are those patients that had a positive effect, right? So those patients where the drug benefited them usually say sort of the same thing, which is they were able to go through their life and they don't feel the need for the drug anymore. That's unique. That's
changing their relationship with the substance they were abusing, right? It's a very, I guess, interesting psychological process that is happening through that therapeutic intervention.
Yes, and you stating that we're not sure if it's that dreamlike state that helps get people sober. We're not 100% sure yet. Now, I guess there's been anecdotal reports of people after an experience, the physical withdrawal symptoms go away for some time. And I know it's early days, and I feel like the answer is going to be I don't know, but I'm going to ask it anyway. That we don't know the answer. Could a trip get rid of physical withdrawal symptoms, or is that really some potentially like rewiring going on in, I guess, the reward circuits in the brain, something like that? I don't have a science background, but I'd like to hear your take on that.
Yeah, again, that's another thing that we're going to look into more closely. I'd say the data around this withdrawal element is a little bit stronger, frankly, than even the longer term relapse data. So it's unclear exactly what's happening is kind of the long and short of it.
Yeah.
I would tend to agree that there's something around the rewiring that presumably has to be happening to make this actually work the way it is. But certainly the details of this aren't known. And again, we just need to really properly characterize this, just like the QT. People have been playing with this drug for a long time in different contexts, and they've done some assessments along the way. But are they truly rigorous from the perspective of regulatory submission? No, they're really not.
Got it.
Thank you for the response. Can you give us a brief breakdown of one of the company's promising non-psychedelic compounds, RL-007, being tested in people who have CIAS, cognitive impairment associated with schizophrenia? Along with this, are the 20 and 40 milligram doses that are being explored in the phase 2b trial the same doses that showed cognitive effects in other trials conducted by Recognify Life Sciences in the past?
Yeah, so starting with kind of the top view on RL-007, it's obviously it's just a really fascinating compound. So people have been looking at cognitive impairment associated with schizophrenia. They've sort of been looking at different specific types of pharmacology that may be implicated from a preclinical perspective or some subset of clinical data. What's unique about this compound is that it does have polypharmacy. It does impact multiple neurotransmitter systems, which is interesting. And this drug was not pharmacologically characterized initially, but it was phenotypically characterized. What that means is instead of looking for activity at a particular receptor, which is many drugs are developed that way, they developed this by saying, okay, let's look for compounds that have XYZ effects, or what effects does this compound have, either way. And what they found here with this compound is they found that it's in animals procognitive and it's also analgesic. And so they made a decision early on to go after these analgesic effects. It's interesting that in animals, low doses were procognitive and high doses were analgesic. And so total of 10 trials at this point, 4 of which were really kind of focused on cognition. one was specific, well, two were specifically focused, one prior to ATAI, and that was a phase 1 trial. So they gave a drug called scopolamine that causes cognitive impairments, and they were able to reverse those cognitive impairments with this compound. And then there was another one in healthy volunteers. Again, these guys were not, did not have any kind of mental compromise, but they still showed some benefits. And then finally, there was actually a trial in a pain population that is diabetic painful neuropathy. And they were actually able to show benefits in that patient population as well. So what was interesting about all these trials is they looked at 1 or 2 low doses, and for current purposes, you can say that's under 100 milligrams. But they really looked at the higher doses to kind of focus on, because that's the realm they were looking at for pain.
Yeah.
And what we, if you look at the animal data in its totality and you look at the human data that we have, really the low dose is the key. And that wasn't adequately explored in humans. And that's what we did in our phase 2A. Yeah. So we looked at 10, 20, 40, and 80. And, in animal, again, what was implied in what I said is an inverted U-shaped curve. So low doses work. Obviously, no drug doesn't work. And then it goes down again. So what we found is exactly that. We found between 10 and 80 didn't really have much of an effect. 20 and 40 did. And that was the basis for moving forward, to answer your question directly, with 20 and 40 into the phase 2B study.
Understood. Thank you for that. I'll pass it on to Jake.
Yes, so I'll just say it's cool when you talk about ATAI Life Sciences. It's not just psychedelic medicine; it's just anything that has shown prior evidence in humans. And I'm very excited about RL-007 being an investor in ATAI, and also deuterated etifoxine. Looking forward to hearing more about those programs in the future. So, on to the next question here. Adam and I have been just really fascinated by the drug development space with NN-DMT specifically, and we're fascinated with VLS-01. Could you maybe explain on what separates your program with others in the space developing NN-DMT? And also just would love to get your take on how you was ATAI encouraged by the phase 2A results from small pharma in MDD with, I believe it was IV administered DMT?
Yeah, happy to answer maybe the last one first. I think we have been encouraged by a lot of data similar to other programs that came out over the years. The most recent study with DMT is, of course, one of them that is certainly increasing our confidence in DMT as a potential therapeutic in depression. And in terms of differentiation, that was an IV study, so it's kind of needle-based. We were early on interested in needle-free approaches, so to speak, and we're evaluating I guess very early on, looking at oral thin films, which is like a transmucosal route of administration of the compound, and believe that this addresses some of kind of the patient, or the likability of the therapy, the likability of the route of administration, as there some people don't like needles, for example, and it's also not this. It's more it's less cumbersome. Not only less cumbersome for the patient, it might be also easier for the practitioners to administer, non-IV or a non-needle-based route of administration. So that is certainly one key differentiator, which we believe will also impact the commercializability of that compound in a positive way. And then we have also a differentiator with our digital therapeutics program that I think we also talked about it at some point, that we intend to apply to some or several of our compounds in development. We have this in development in conjunction with VLS-01, with our DMT program. We do believe there's a potential to also here have a positive impact on the commercializability of the treatment by having this integrated digital approach that helps to prepare the patient for the experience and also helps to integrate the experiences. So today in the US, we have a significant therapist shortage, as you very, very well know, in the mental health space. So psychotherapy or psychotherapists are very scarce. You have to wait a long time to get a therapist appointment, and those psychedelic therapies that we are developing, or also others are developing, like MAPS, the MDMA-assisted therapy, they will require a lot of human resources. And we believe through technology we can address some of the so-called scalability concerns. So basically, how can we optimize the therapist time in a way that we can achieve more scale, meaning also more access for patients, so that they don't need to wait a month to actually achieve undergoing the therapy once we have it approved, of course.
Got it.
Yeah, I think this. Well, okay.
After you, Srini, please.
I was just going to point out one more thing on the points of differentiation. So, I mean, if you look broadly at 5-methoxy as well as DMT, for the most part, people are looking at relatively rapid administration. So certainly that's true with inhalational approaches. You know, the administration is essentially instantaneous. But even when you think about small pharma, it was a very short administration protocol. It was around, I think it was around 10 minutes total. So they pushed it in pretty quickly.
Okay.
And that, of course, results in a relatively short psychedelic effect, and typically wrapping up less than half an hour. So we are looking for something a bit longer than that. I really want to split, you know, so ketamine is kind of on a little over an hour, I mean, typically. And so whether it's esketamine or ketamine. So we would like to push it out a little bit longer. The conjecture is it gives you a little bit more time to explore, right, in that space. And again, that's conjecture. But more broadly, we don't really know the impact of duration of psychedelic effect on durability of response. And so the general idea here is to see if we can, you know, the longer may be better. We don't know that for 100% certainty, but that's kind of the conjecture. You can only test so many variables in a clinical development program. So at least, you know, you want to try and fix some things. It's like, okay, well, we can get this to work in an existing paradigm or in ketamine clinics. So let's try and kind of push that out and see how that works out. So that's what we're doing. So there's a point of differentiation. And, you know, on the digital, it is really important to keep in mind that, you know, as Florian was saying, it's all about scalability. But if you think about what a ketamine clinic can do right now, for the most part, they do not have psych support, right? They don't do the prep work or integration. That's unique to psychedelics. So if we can take the vast majority of that and put it into a digital context, that would allow for scalability. Because again, there's already well over 1,000 clinics. I think it's closer to 1,500 of these clinics at this point that are already out there. So I don't know what percent. You know, we don't really have a good sense of what percentage of those can do psychological support. It's not tremendous. So this will allow, basically a drag and drop into those clinics, and that's really what we're going for.
The Spravato sales are, of course, encouraging there, so that we early on identified the Spravato paradigm as something that we wanted to slot in. There was initially a lot of disappointment in the initial kind of uptake of that therapy. Now they're looking at very solid annualized numbers. I guess another reason why, or how that can be seen as allowing greater access by leveraging an existing infrastructure that goes beyond of the kind of the ketamine clinics, but more addressing the infrastructure that underwent the REMS program of Spravato.
In regards to the DMT on the buccal film, is this DMT experience supposed to be closer to a traditional like DMT experience? Is it closer to ayahuasca? What is the goal in terms of the headspace you're trying to bring someone into?
I mean, it's a good question. So ayahuasca is complicated because it's got other compounds in it, right? It's long and it's got the harmalines. It's got a few other things that are kicking around there. So that's a bit complicated. DMT, as it's been currently tested, has really been this push. So the PK is really going to drive, so there's a couple of things that are going to drive the nature of the experience. One is what you're told going into it. Believe it or not, I mean, the people tend to be pretty suggestible going into it. Yeah. And the other one is the PK. So if you're sort of being blasted in hyperspace, well, that's going to be very different than if your PK is within, your Cmax is in a minute. That's very different than if it takes many minutes to get up to the Cmax. Your brain has some time to adapt. So we are, we have a pretty good sense at this point from the initial phase 1 data. It is it's a little hard to say if it's exactly like either of those. It's a little bit different than both.
Yeah.
To be honest with you.
Cool. And Florian, you mentioned Spravato, and I know investors in the space have definitely been impressed with the numbers that's doing. So I guess the negatives of Spravato is that someone has to come, and I think when they first start, they go twice a week for the first month or something, and then they have to go every other week. And I guess my just educated guess following the space is that what makes these psychedelics promising is that they can keep people not depressed for months at a time rather than weeks. And this brings me to my question on digital therapeutics. I know it's earlier days, but are you guys looking at digital therapeutics possibly to give clinicians a signal of when someone needs to be treated again?
Yes.
That's one of Srini's favorite projects. I think but I guess transparently or being upfront, it's early days, but that certainly is something what we are looking into. Also to be able to, and that's what we also got in the past. Like the ultimate goal is to really treat the patient, not the disease, and for that you want to be able to personalize therapy in a way so that you don't have a static redosing regimen, but can individualize it to the patient's needs. And I'll let Srini go into detail there. But I guess the way that we think about it, zooming out again about digital therapeutics and why we're so excited about them, is that ultimately we believe we need to enable patients to change their behavior in a clinically meaningful way, to achieve like these sustained durable outcomes. And I think the compound, neuroplastic, behavioral plastic, that puts you in the state where you can change behaviors is a very important component. But then having something like a digital therapeutic that delivers ongoing psychological support, and Srini can go into detail like how we are thinking about that further potentially can then also increase durability of those effects by fostering positive habits that you form over time after the experience during that period that you have to positively change your behavior. And indeed, to your point, this is meant to be an interventional treatment, not a chronic dose like an SSRI you take every day. This is one time that we hoped to be very durable, or we anticipate to be very durable based on the data that is out there. And do we believe it's one and done for everyone? Certainly not. I think there was this notion that it's something like psilocybin is a panacea and will cure all diseases on this planet. I think we have to be very careful to be overly optimistic there. Do we believe it very much differentiates from available treatment? Absolutely yes. And I think that's indeed also a differentiator from Spravato, like you mentioned earlier. Similar paradigm, but much still have to be seen. But our hypothesis is it's much more durable than the Spravato based on one dose that would be administered.
Yeah, I mean, I think the small pharma data certainly supports at least a couple of weeks of durability, right? I mean, I think that's important. Not surprising from our perspective. The fundamental thing here is that, I mean, I've been on a bit of a tear on this point. If the patient is doing well, the goal is remission, right? If the patient's in remission, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to redose them, right? They will at some point fall out of remission. They will at some point get symptoms back. These are chronic diseases. And then of course or they'll at least start trending back up. It is totally appropriate at that point to intervene in some way. And of course that intervention could indeed be a redosing, but flogging someone that's doing well doesn't make sense. And the converse is true. Some people will just not respond to this drug. Full stop. They will not, just like psilocybin. It will not be beneficial to them. And once again, I don't want to keep flogging someone that is not going to be responsive to this compound, right? So that's where the dynamic dosing is really important. And this is a little different than ketamine. I mean, ketamine or esketamine is much more benign in a way, right? It's much less of a much less of a profound experience, typically, I mean, broadly speaking, than ketamine. You know what I mean? So that's where that argument comes from. We want to try and do enough to get the patient going. I mean, if they're responding but not in remission, of course you want to redose them. you want to get them down into remission and then see how things go on. So that will work out. So that's generally the idea here, and of course, digital will play a role in that ultimately.
Awesome. And by the way, I appreciate both of you guys bringing up that this isn't going to work for everyone and it's not a magic bullet. Someone like myself wanting to go into the field of mental health, one of my worries about psychedelic medicine is people having perhaps expectations that are too high and they end up disappointed. Especially, I'm sure people now see these trial results and maybe they're self-treating, which also worries me. I think when you're in a vulnerable state, you need support. But where I'm going with this is the digital therapeutics part of preparing someone, like maybe a video is shown and saying, like, listen, this may not work. Just, I know letting go is important. Or is like a video given? I know maybe you can't get into details now, but I would like to ask, like, maybe is a video shown to someone before, like, what to expect and maybe setting expectations to be realistic?
Yeah, so that would be part of informed consent, right? Whether or not it's a video, sort of, as an aside, but certainly in the general sense, you'd say that these are the sort of things that you will experience, and it could be beneficial or not. But of course, it's an investigational drug, so we're trying to work that out. So that's generally how informed consent would work. Of course, you can elaborate on that with a video, and Compass has done that as well. In fact, I know that they have a video in YouTube that
I saw it
goes through. Yeah, it's quite good, actually. It's a very good video.
It is.
That's a very passive approach, and that's fine. Then what typically has happened in the past is prep work, and prep work is involved in intention setting. But it's really, it goes back to what I said previously, that what you bring into the experience is going to be what manifests during that, and potentially what you will get some benefit from. So the idea of really thinking through what it is you want, and then kind of reiterating that and maybe bringing that up on the day of, and then having that sort of front of mind could get you some benefits. Again, I want to emphasize this is conjecture, and the big picture here is we don't actually know what the role of the psychedelic effect really. But just if you're going to go down this road, the prep and the intention setting seems to be something important to this. And likewise, after the drug, having some means of integrating what happened. If it was relevant, if it wasn't relevant, it doesn't matter. But at least kind of contextualizing and integrating that into your daily life also seems to be beneficial, though some people disagree on that point, right? So that's kind of where we're starting with this. So to go back to your question of, yes, there are videos, but it is a bit more involved in that in terms of how we're, there's journaling, there's a lot of other things that we're doing in there to really kind of get the patient in the right mindset and the right, to really benefit the most from this experience.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's awesome hearing these answers. So I guess we'll move on to EMP-01. I've been very excited about this. It's the company's MDMA derivative. Can you explain to the viewers what ATAI hopes to see from the phase 1 trial? In what ways does EMP-01 have the potential to improve on generic MDMA?
Yeah, so I think it's better pharmacological targeting is really kind of the bottom line here. So, MDMA so the entactogenic effects of MDMA seem to be driven by the serotonin effect. And certainly there's a lot of preclinical data that supports that. There are other effects that may or may not be quite as useful. So there's an increase in norepinephrine. That tends to be anxiogenic, right? So if I push norepinephrine on you right now, you'll get pretty amped up, and your brain will be like, oh, well, my body's amped up. There must be a reason for that. And you'll feel kind of amped up. This is actually causing central release as well. So that's may or may not be good. And the dopaminergic effects are not great. You get a lot of teeth grinding. You can actually get you can get a fever-like syndrome. You can become hyperthermic off of this. Norepinephrine also causes marked increases in blood pressure. And that's been seen. So of course, these are acute drugs, but nonetheless, anything we can do to mitigate that and kind of focus on the entactogenic effect would be good. And could we improve the entactogenic effect at higher doses because we don't have to worry about these other drug effects? Yeah. Interesting. We want to see if that's true, and that's going to take some data. Also, can you get better efficacy if you're not anxious? Maybe. That also is a hypothesis that's worth testing. So these are the sort of things that we're looking for. Obviously, the phase 1 is only the first step there. Ultimately, we'll need some kind of an efficacy study to really kind of get get to the root of the matter on these points.
Awesome, thank you. And lastly, on the drug development side specifically, I'd like to ask you guys about the work Entheogenics is doing to develop next-gen psychedelics. And if you could answer this, perhaps not, but when could investors expect phase 1 trials to begin with ATAI's next-gen psychedelics?
Yeah, I mean, happy to contextualize for the viewers, I guess, why we're actually also doing drug discovery programs and continue to be very excited about these, right? So we're primarily clinical focused right now.
Yes.
And that includes with Compass Pathways and psilocybin or COMP360, somewhat that we would consider like a first generation psychedelic. And then we are also looking at second generation, that's kind of BLS-01, the DMT program that we touched upon earlier, where we are tweaking route of administration, formulation, also the duration of the experience or the duration of effect to kind of fit it into a certain paradigm that we believe, as we discussed, allow for greater accessibility. And then the third generation are NCEs that are completely de novo developed, and there we have different approaches, some AI computational based approaches and some more traditional medicinal chemistry approaches that we're all very excited about, that address some of the known profiles like Srini just discussed now with racemic and MDMA, where we can optimize these potentially. And that's kind of from a broader picture, something that we believe is very valuable to invest in as it kind of grows the next candidates that we could then develop also in the clinic. But over to you, Srini, for some of the details on the program.
Yeah, so the thing that was nice about this collaboration with Cyclica was that we were able to use their computational chemistry capabilities, right? So, and really optimize for multiple targets. So, you can optimize for 5-HT2A, but we wanted to look at the broader picture around 5-HT1A, 5-HT2A, et cetera. Get rid of 5-HT2B as much as possible. That's the one that's more of a safety liability. Not a big issue with a single administration for the most part, but it is something actually that the FDA brought up again, right? In their recent psychedelic drug development guidance, they did bring up 5-HT2B and the need for doing assessments there. So if we can bring that pharmacology down, that's obviously a good thing. So these are the targets. Initial focus was something that was similar to a psilocybin or a DMT pharmacologically, shorter half-life than a psilocybin, certainly. And what we found were we made over 700 compounds that were based on the computational chemistry. We tested those, found some really good hits, early hits, which we then further optimized. And then from there, we now have 2 lead candidates that we're going to be developing. Haven't provided any guidance on when they'll get to phase 1.
Okay.
Behind those, I mean, as you develop all these compounds, you also find really interesting things like compounds that are really strong agonists at 2A that do not have head twitch, as an example. So they're non-psychedelic, or at least, insofar as head twitch is a proxy for psychedelic effect, they don't seem to have it. There are biased agonists because there's different second messenger systems inside the cell that these compounds can hit. So we've got some interesting biased agonists. So these are also, these are sort of next generation compounds, or even, I guess, 4th generation, if you will, coming out of this work. So there's a lot that's really been uncovered there, a lot that we've discovered in that context, and really novel structures. They don't look particularly like anything else out there, which is nice.
Florian mentioned, when he mentioned the DMT, you said you were tweaking the duration. How long of an experience are you guys aiming for in regards to the DMT program you have?
Yeah, we're looking for something closer to 45 minutes plus minus, right? So ideally a little bit plus from there, but that's what we're really targeting with our formulation. So of course, DMT itself is very short, it has a very short half-life, but you can control the release of it, in this case with an oral transmucosal film, and that way you can get a longer profile. You can't do the converse, of course. If you got a long compound with a long half-life, you can't make it shorter, but because DMT is so short, you can do what you need.
Oh, got you. All right, cool. So that's interesting. So it's because of the transmucosal films that is increasing the half or increasing the way it's kind of being administered. All right, cool. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course.
And I'd like to ask in terms of the next gen psychedelics that we still don't know yet, for non-hallucinogenic 5-HT2A agonists that we don't know if they're effective yet for depression. But in terms of that area of drug development, I know Delix is, I guess they're, I think, finishing up a phase 1. A question I'm curious now, I know a couple of companies are developing these drugs. So let's say they fail a phase 2 trial in terms of efficacy. Does everyone just say, okay, like no more, we're not developing the non-hallucinogenic psychoplastogens anymore? Or is everyone looking at this a little bit differently? I know Delix, I read some articles that they're looking at like potentially a pill once a month or something like that. I know other companies are looking at more of a microdosing approach, where there's a ceiling effect and no matter how much you take, there's no hallucinations. I would just like to, just curious about the Delix question. Like if they failed an efficacy trial, what would happen to the space? Just curious.
I mean, it just depends. I think this is totally new territory in many ways. I mean, well, there are some previous companies like Brain Cells, et cetera, that was looking at neuroplasticity as a driver for depression. But certainly, that's kind of gotten new legs at this point, and people are pursuing it. I think the short answer is we don't know, but it is more complex than that, because it could be that a patient with depression that's already responded to something is in remission, maybe the one that benefits. I don't know, as opposed to driving someone down. I think the piece that I kind of grapple with or struggle with a little bit is, neuroplasticity by itself, is that good? I don't know. I mean, I can do a thought experiment. Neuroplasticity, if I give you something that's profoundly neuroplastic and then you drive off and crash a car, is that going to be good? I tend to not think so. But this is a thought experiment. It's not based on data. You probably need some context or something that you're doing. That could be therapy. It doesn't need to be a psychedelic effect, but it seems to me that you need to do something during that period of time that helps. And the drug is basically helping cement some new pathways. I mean, that's kind of the way I think about it. So, if you had a pure psychedelic compound without neuroplasticity, that doesn't sound so great. That sounds like REM sleep to me. And if you have a purely neuroplastic compound without psychedelic effects, I don't know if that's also going to be, because if you're just cementing the if you're cementing even further things like ruminative thoughts, also not good, right? So again, this is a thought experiment. We really have no idea what the reality is, and we have to do those experiments. But this is, something that I kind of grapple with a little bit.
Yeah, and Jake, I believe it will be one data point and some. Yeah. Usually, so I wouldn't foresee like one trial failing. Everyone kind of drops everything and then stops working on it. So I think it will be one important, and also depending on what they find, right? It will be informative for the sector to kind of generate new hypotheses. And that's, I guess, how science works, right? You iterate your way forward. I hope that won't discourage, for one, investors and also biotechs to further look at that kind of very exciting area in my perspective.
Yeah, and that's what I said. I mean, there could be different use cases within depression,
right,
that may be well suited for this class of compounds.
Awesome. And the last question I have for you guys is, so ATAI has a runway till 2026. It's a long time to put out proof of concept data from a bunch of programs. Can you explain to investors why this is so significant?
Yeah, I mean, for one, we're, I guess, for one, grateful and to be in a position of strength where we don't need to raise anytime soon. So I think that's a clear differentiator. Also, when talking to investors, there's no immediate need for dilution or dilutive capital to actually get to the next inflection point or inflection points. We set ourselves up also by bringing on non-dilutive capital like the Hercules debt facility that we can deliver on the value inflection points of our clinical programs in a way without additional needs to raise dilutive capital. And in addition to that, being able to really focus on the execution of those trials, it allows us also to opportunistically look at some external innovation, to look basically what's out there, and if we come across something, make certain additions to our pipeline. So I think that in combination is a quite compelling selling proposition, if you want, and puts us into the position to, one, really execute and don't worry about financing kind of every day, and kind of remain opportunistic in case we come across something that is we deem to be very value additive to what we're already doing.
Awesome. And in terms of M&A, didn't you guys last year hire a new chief business officer? Is he in charge of? Is that what he's looking at basically from time to time? If there's any opportunities for M&A?
Yeah, I'm very excited to have Sahil on the board. He joined from Otsuka. Actually, we were working together on Compass Pathways, so we know each other for indirectly. So we on Compass. I don't know which series this was, when they were still private. Otsuka made already an investment together with us. So kind of we go back some time. So it's great to be able to even more closely work together. And he's indeed in charge of the M&A activities. Yeah.
Awesome. Those are all my questions. I really appreciate you guys coming on today. This was an awesome discussion. Adam, do you have any last questions?
I think I'm good too. I appreciate you guys coming on the show. I was looking forward to this interview for a long time. If you guys want to address the audience in any way, you can feel free to, and then we can just wrap everything up.
I think from my part, just grateful that you guys were, one, patient, and two, kind of wanting to talk to us. So I think that was a great conversation. I don't have anything to add at this point. Srini, any final closing remarks?
No, same. I just really appreciate, again, the time, the interest, the enthusiasm, and the great questions.
Yeah, and you're doing a really great job. I kind of also follow your work, so I think it's really important.
Yes.
Thank you.
What you guys doing to kind of raise that awareness for one, and educate people on what's going on. It's really cool to see.
Really enjoy it.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. That's very validating.
We're very passionate about the space, and I know people are going to be excited when we put this out. So thank you so much for coming on.
Okay, everyone. So this was Dr. Srinivas Rao, co-founder and chief scientific officer of ATAI Life Sciences, and Florian Brand, co-founder and chief executive officer of ATAI Life Sciences. Thank you so much for watching this interview, and stay tuned for the next one. Have a great day, everyone.